resistance to current flow depends on the mineralogy, particle arrangement, water content, salinity, etc. Resistivity is a fundamental property of the material which is independent of the geometry. The typical ranges of resistivities in common rocks and soils you can see here. The values here are in ohm meters. So you can see that if it is fresh water or if it is dry, the resistivity would increase, whereas the saline water or brackish water, you would get a relatively lower resistivity. Different kinds of materials, different ranges have been proposed by various authors, and this one is popularly used, Karan's reference. Similar kind of a range also available in literature here. Now I go on to how you interpret from the resistivity the layers. So what is done is you plot the electrode spacing versus A by apparent resistivity, the spacing divided by apparent resistivity. So what you actually measure in the test is an apparent resistivity, which is some sort of average of all the resistivity of the different layers. So if you have multiple layers, then you would plot A versus A by rho A, and you would get different segments. So the inverse of this slope of the this plot, this gives you the true resistivity of the layer. So this is called the inverse slope method. So this is one typical case where we had used in a project in Nepal across river Charela. So with the help of borehole data and resistivity data, the layers had been interpreted. So these negative slopes indicate, of course, very high resistivity. So this was the pebbles and boulders here. So this is the interpretation of the geoelectric profile. Of course, there are limitations. You must know the geology and the stratigraphy for proper interpretation. The resistivity test cannot be used on its own. A steeply dipping or variable strata, there could be erratic interpretations. Of course, if the location is underwater, like for bridges and all, then it may not be feasible. You can identify the layers, the geotechnical parameters like C, phi, gamma, etc. that you cannot obtain. So it cannot be treated as an alternative to boreholes. It is interpreted, the stratigraphy is a guideline, and may be a little different from the actual. You have to match with the borehole data. Now I come to resistivity imaging. This is an advanced development in resistivity method. Basically, it is the computer data acquisition. You have enhanced data quality and resolution. It can provide you with continuous two-dimensional resistivity models. So here 50 or more electrodes can be set out in a regular spaced array connected to a resistivity meter, and the electrode spacing is determined by parameters such as profile length, desired resolution, and targeted depth of penetration. The separation between the sampled electrodes is then widened to increase the effective depth of penetration, and the procedure is repeated to get increasing depth range. So advanced data processing using specialist inversion softwares removes the distortions caused by the effects of the electrode geometry to produce a high resolution image of the variations in the ground resistivity with depth. The model is contoured along a color scale to produce a two-dimensional cross-sectional model of the ground. So the geophysicist then corroborates the local geology with the final resistivity imaging section to provide to provide the actual subsurface ground profile. This is a typical geoelectric profile based on resistivity imaging. So you can see here, these are all lower resistivity zones. Here you are getting the higher resistivity zones. I will not go too much into the detailed interpretation, but this is a concept which can be effectively used. I move on to seismic wave velocity tests. Geophysical tests based on software on seismic wave velocities. These tests include seismic the crosshole seismic test, seismic refraction test, and SASW. These are the tests which I will be covering here. There are other tests like MASW, and there is the downhole test and the uphole seismic test, which are all suspension logging. There are various methods. In these tests, the recorded waveforms are used and the wave velocities are determined from the and from there on, you can determine your dynamic shear modulus and elastic shear modulus. So this slide shows you the various methods which are available. The top portion tells you the laboratory methods available, and the lower portion shows you the field tests. So the laboratory, you have the resonant shear, torsional shear, bender element, cyclic triaxial. So these are all the laboratory tests, but more popular are the field tests. The SASW or the MASW, which I just talked to you about. Then you have suspension logging, in which you have two geophones suspended in the borehole at different depths. You have the crosshole seismic test, where you have energy generated in one borehole and the response being received in the borehole nearby. There is the downhole seismic, in which the energy impact is given at the ground surface, and you see the response in the geophone at different depths in the borehole. The seismic cone, last week, Mr. Saurabh had discussed in little detail about the seismic cone penetration test. So this also can give you the shear wave velocities at different depths. So the data obtained, the crosshole seismic and downhole seismic tests give the shear wave velocity profile with depth at the borehole location. Also gives you the P wave velocities. The uphole seismic test, the seismic refraction test, and SASW and MASW. These tests give general trend of shear wave velocity along the seismic line. The seismic results should be correlated to the borehole data to confirm the stratigraphy for foundation analysis. So as I told you, the other tests which are available for determining shear wave velocity: seismic cone penetration test, refraction microtremor, and crosshole seismic tomography. So I come to crosshole seismic test. So here you have 3 boreholes usually along a line, spaced 3 to 4 meters apart, and you have a source in one borehole. It's a piezoelectric source in which you create an energy, and geophones in the adjoining boreholes. So the energy is generated here, and you receive the waves there, and from that you can interpret the wave velocities. So horizontally traveling P and S waves are generated in a borehole at the desired depth. The arrival times are recorded in 2 adjacent boreholes, spaced 3 to 4 meters apart. The test is conducted usually at every 1.5 meter depth interval. You could do it at 1 to 2 meters also. So here you have the geophone being lowered, and that's the data acquisition. So this is the complete data acquisition system. So the geophone has an inflatable bladder at the side, so that you can fix the geophone tightly at the required depth. And this is the close-up view of the orthogonal sensors. Typical results of the cross-hole seismic test. So this gives me the wave velocity with depth. This is the primary wave velocity, and this is the shear wave velocity. Then you have the dynamic Young's modulus and the dynamic shear modulus, and you have the coefficient of uniform elastic compression and uniform elastic shear, coefficient of elastic non-uniform compression and shear too. So this that cross-hole seismic test is one of the most reliable methods of determining the dynamic parameters in situ. I move on to seismic refraction test. Here you have energy generated at one point and a series of geophones along a line. So primarily it measures the primary wave and shear wave velocities. It determines the lithology, or that is the overburden thickness, the depth to rock, and the weathering profile in the rock. The dynamic soil parameters like shear modulus, Young's modulus, Poisson's ratio can also be determined. So the principle of seismic refraction is that elastic waves are initiated at the ground surface. Seismic waves travel along the discontinuities or interface between the layers and are refracted back to the ground level. So the arrival time of seismic energy is determined at a number of points along a line in which the geophones are placed here. So the seismic travel time data is used to determine the primary and shear wave velocities and the depth of the layers. So this shows the impact being generated and the test in progress. You can see the geophones along the line. So this is the close-up view of the geophone. So this is the travel time records, and if you were to plot the time on this axis and the distance along the other, so you can see here that there would be a change of slope as you as a wave enters from one layer to the other. So that crossover point, then this is correlated to the change when the depth of the layer. So basically, you can see this is the way that the wave would travel from a higher velocity to a lower velocity, or from a lower velocity material to a higher velocity material. So the velocity depends on the hardness and compaction and degree of consolidation. So seismic waves are refracted as they pass on from one medium to another. So the Snell's law, which is used for light, so the bending of the seismic waves is also governed by the same law, sensors, Snell's law. So the advantages of the seismic refraction test is that generalized stratigraphy over large areas can quickly be assessed, and identification of anomalous zones, fissure or fractured zones, etc. You can do that. Shear zones or sinkholes and all, you can identify these kind of layers. Data can be used for dynamic analysis of structures, but of course every test has its own limitations. If there is a softer layer underlying a hard layer, then that cannot be identified, because the wave always takes the path of least resistance. The intermediate thin layers can be missed out, and where the bedrock is undulating, the interpretation of the layers can be misleading. The typical seismic profile for a project in Sundarnagar Coal Dam project. So there's a lot of ground level variation too. So that has been put into the system, and we could estimate the layer velocity of the different layers, and according to the velocity, the material type has been interpreted. The SASW, of course, is a surface test. Again, it is similar to the seismic refraction. It is done along a line. You have a receivers and an impact point. So here, this is the system which is used. for conducting the test, you have the impact at one point and the wave being generated and received at the geophones along the line. Normally, an array of 24 geophones is used. With this background, I will demonstrate the use of geophysical tests for geotechnical investigation to effectively design the foundation system for a project. So I'm taking two case studies. One is a landslide on a highway on the Himalayan hill slopes. And the second one is a power plant in North Delhi on soils prone to liquefaction. So the first case study is a landslide area in on a highway on the Himalayan hill slopes. Landslides, as you know, is a complex geological process. The fragile hills of the lesser Himalayas are prone to landslides. An interplay of several forces trigger them. Geotechnical configuration of the rocks and the large level variations make the rock mass inherently unstable and vulnerable to movement. Heavy rain and seepage through the jointed rock mass can play havoc on the stability of the region. Balance between environmental protection and infrastructure development, this has always been a dilemma. There have been a lot of cloudbursts in Himachal and Uttarakhand this year. This one is a cloudburst that occurred in 2013. This cloudburst triggered several landslides along the Rudraprayag Badrinath section of NH58. So I'm taking a case study of one landslide which occurred at Birahi along the highway NH58, which is on the banks of the river Alaknanda. This highway is of distinct importance because of destinations of pilgrim and tourist importance like Badrinath, Hemkund Sahib, Valley of Flowers, and Oli. You all have to pass through on this highway. So this presentation here includes geotechnical investigations in the landslide area, which included boreholes and seismic refraction tests. Then, of course, the geotechnical characterization of the landslide was done, and engineering solutions to mitigate the distress to ensure safety of the highway were worked out. So let's see the site conditions here at Birahi. The NH58 continues into a hairpin bend at Birahi. The rocks are highly folded and faulted, with the Birahi fault passing northeast of this slide zone. The superficial soils along the slope are prone to landslide, particularly during rains. This is a panoramic view of the area. You can see the slide that has occurred, and also there has been a disturbance down here. You look at the geological setting. The area belongs to the Lesser Himalayas, Central Crystalline Group. It lies in a tectonic 4D, sanctioned between the North Almora Thrust and the main Central Thrust. Rocks exposed at Birahi comprise a highly jointed and fractured quartzitic schist of the Garhwal Formation. It's a rugged topography with moderate to steep slopes and intervening narrow valleys. The overburdened soils and fractured rocks are present, and the area is highly prone to landslides during heavy rains. So that's a view of the landslide. You can see the slide on the upper portion of the hairpin bend. The joint planes are exposed here, shows that the rock dip is unfavorable. So you can see here that the dips are all unfavorable, sliding downwards. This is a satellite image taken in 2006. You can see there is absolutely no indication of any distress in 2006. In 2011, there was some initiation of distress was evident. You can see the Alaknanda River down below. And then the cloudburst in 2013, this image in 2014 has shown the landslide which has occurred during that period. So you can see the condition in 2016. So that's a schematic of the landslide. Unfavorable dip of the rock is what caused the landslide. The cloudburst resulted in buildup of pore water pressure behind the gabion wall of the road, and the movement of the rock mass along the weak plains resulted in increased instability. The erosion of the river bank toe during heavy rains caused movement of the overburden along this slope. So you can see the erosion and the accumulated debris. Is the road here, and the downside, the debris has got collected. So let's see what the engineering solution was. First, of course, was the geotechnical investigation with deep borehole and geophysical tests in conjunction with a geological study to evaluate the landslide, its lateral extent and severity of the problem. Obviously, geophysical tests cannot be used independently. You have to use it together with geotechnical evaluation and geological studies so that you can evaluate the problems related to the landslide. So seismic refraction tests were used to effectively characterize the ground in the landslide zone. The assessment has been used to work out engineering solutions for long-term stability of the distress zone. So this includes drainage planning, erosion control, and reinforcement on the valley side. So this shows the test locations. So we had 2 boreholes on the upper side and 2 boreholes on the lower side, as well as seismic refraction lines along the upper side of the hairpin bend and on the lower side of the lower road level. So this shows the boreholes in progress at the lower level and at the higher level. You can see here the unfavorable dip of the rocks. So at the lower elevation, we had the colluvium or boulder soil matrix to about 11 to 12.5 meter depth. This is all mostly landslide material. And then below this, we got the quartzitic mica schist. At the higher level, the thickness of the slide material was little lower, 2 to 4 meters, and then you had the rock. When we did the seismic refraction test, you can see the geophones along the line, and this is the data acquisition system. There's a seismic profile. So at the higher level, you got lesser thickness of the overburden, and below that, the fractured rock was there. And in the lower line, of course, again, you had the overburden of the slide zone, and then the fractured rock. So the remedial measures planned here, these have been implemented now, included drainage planning. Here, water was channelized from the hill, discharged through a culvert to the roadside edge drain, and from this, the culvert water was directed to the river through a chute. Erosion control. So along the slopes, we had these anchors were installed, 25 mm diameter bars, 3 meter spacing. So all along, and then bioengineering measures, growth of grass, and secured with geogrid. So geogrid was spread all along here, and for surface stability. And the entire stretch here, the gabion wall 3 meter high was provided. On the valley side, the reinforced soil wall was provided, 25 meter height. So the gabion and wraparound facing units with geogrids were provided, and so there were these trail of secondary facing units, and the entire area was tied up with the nails. I now move on to the second case study, power plant on liquefiable soils in North Delhi. So this site was in North Delhi, near Rohini. It's a 108 megawatt gas-based power plant in the alluvial plains of the Yamuna River. The facilities planned included the turbines, boiler, chimney, cooling water systems, switchyard, etc. The area lies in earthquake zone 4 as per IS 1893. The loose sands to 8 meter depth were prone to liquefaction during major earthquakes. So the investigation which was done included 15 boreholes, 6 static cone penetration tests, and SASW tests along 8 lines, and 3 cross-hole seismic tests. So that's a layout plan showing the various tests which were performed. The typical borehole data. You can see here there are some thin silt zones, but primarily it is all sand with intermediate layers of sandy silt. The groundwater was at about 5.2 to 6.4 meter depth. Was for the design, it was taken at the ground level. So the SPT was done using an automatic trip hammer. This is the SPT profile. So this showed that N value was less than 15 to about 11 meter depth. The CPT profile also showed loose conditions to about 11 meter depth. So that was the design profile here. Then the cross-hole seismic test, this was done, this is the data acquisition for the project. And then of course the SASW test was also performed along 8 lines. So this is the plot of the shear wave velocities from SASW and from cross-hole seismic test. So this is the design profile of the shear wave velocity. So up to about 5 meter depth, you can see low wave velocities, and then it increases to 240 to 200 to 240 meter per second, 10 meter, and then below that it exceeds 250 meter meter per second. So from SASW you get slightly higher wave velocities. Both indicate that we have a relatively lower shear wave velocity to about 8-9 meter depth. So detailed liquefaction analysis was done as per IS 1893 2016 Annexure F. So you determine the cyclic stress ratio and the cyclic resistance ratio. So the factor of safety is taken as the cyclic resistance ratio divided by the stress ratio. Since it is in the earthquake zone 4, the magnitude of earthquake was taken as 6.7 and the peak ground acceleration 0.24 G. For this project, because it's an important project, the factor of safety against liquefaction was specified as 1.2. So this is the CRR and CSR based on SPT. So from the analysis, you can see that the factor of safety shows you around 9 meters. The factor of safety exceeds 1.2. From SCPT, again, the results was showing that the critical factor of safety is around 1.2 at 9 meter depth. From the shear wave velocities, we got a slightly lower depth of liquefaction, around 7.5 meter. So combining all, so the decision which was taken was that we take the liquefiable zone up to about 8 meter depth below the ground surface. So the engineering solution which was worked out was that for critical heavily loaded facilities such as TG and boiler, chimney, etc., bore piles of 600 mm diameter extending well below the liquefiable zone were provided, and for medium loaded facilities such as clariflocculator, cooling towers, etc., where settlement is not so sensitive, ground improvement was done by vibro replacement, that is stone columns. So this was the design for the normal condition and for the seismic condition. The pile capacities were worked out for 600 mm diameter piles. So we had compression of 81 tons under normal condition, 74 under seismic condition, considering the liquefaction. And the uplift, again, you can see for 48 and for 42 tons. Factor of safety used was 2.5. For the seismic condition, of course, the skin friction in the liquefiable zone was ignored. The vibro replacement was done by stone columns. This was done by Keller. Dry vibro stone columns were installed by bottom feed method. So 500 mm diameter stone columns extending to about 10 meter depth, since the liquefaction was to 8 meter depth. So the stone columns are extended to 10 meter depth. The center-to-center spacing between the stone columns was kept as 1.5 meter, and the design bearing pressure which was required for the design was 160 kPa. So as a quality assurance measure, dynamic cone penetration tests were done after compaction. So you can see here that below 2 meter depth, the SPT values are all more than 15, and there is a substantial improvement in the penetration resistance. And below 5 meter depth, in fact, the soils are quite dense, and the liquefaction analysis was done, and it showed that the improved soils are not likely to liquefy during the earthquake. So a load test was done on the vibrostone columns. In fact, 2 cycles of loads were obtained, were applied. 300 mm thick sand pad was placed over the vibrostone column, and test plate size was 1.5 by 1.5 meter. So from the results, we could see that as far as the design bearing capacity is concerned of 160 kPa, the foundations are safe. With this, I conclude. Geophysical tests are a useful method for characterizing the ground in conjunction with the borehole data. In situ tests such as pressure meter tests, static cone penetration tests, load tests, as well as geophysical tests can confirm the continuity of the strata, evaluate the stratigraphy, and determine the relevant parameters. If the ground throws up surprises, geophysical tests can provide the required support to evaluate the problem and work out the solution. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir. That was a very comprehensive lecture, very detailed discussion. You covered electrical resistivity test, resistivity imaging, and a seismic wave velocity test, cross hole seismic test, from discussing from advantages and disadvantages. And then you discussed some of the practical experiences which were there with you. So I request participants to ask their queries. Yes, ma'am, please.
Hello, sir. Very nice presentation. I wanted to know if there are any tests or any methods with which you can absolutely determine what is the bedrock.
What is the bedrock? We have been using seismic refraction tests very effectively to determine bedrock. Uh, Seismic refraction test basically, as the wave velocity increases with depth from the overburdened soil to the bedrock, you can determine that very well from seismic refraction test.
So, but what are the parameters that define the bedrock? At what velocity would you say that we have reached the bedrock in a way?
No, there is no straight answer like that. First of all, you would have to know what is the nature of the rock, whether you are having a sandstone or a shale or a granite or a basalt. So you would have to have understanding of the geology of the area, because different rocks have different wave velocities. Secondly, you should have some boreholes to verify your present estimates of the depth of the rock. So if you have at a few points you have the depth of the rock, then you can match it with the rest of the profile. So once you know the nature of the rock, then you can match it with the published velocities for the different layers,
Okay.
the different rocks. Then you will be able to make a call whether it is a rock or a hard soil or what.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I hope this answers. Engineer Abhijit Godial, sir, you want to ask something, please?
Hello.
Yes, yes,
Good
sir.
evening, sir. Good evening, sir. Very nice presentation, sir.
Good evening, Abhijit.
Yeah. So actually, I want to know, for instance, if we have blasted the subsurface, what will means how we can know the effect of blast, like on the porosity of the subsurface data. Is there any test to know the same?
You want to know the porosity of the
Yes. Substrata after blasting.
after blasting.
Yes.
Uh,
Means is there an impact on the bearing capacity of this strata? So I would like to conclude based on the porosity and or any change in wire ratio after blasting.
See, if it is a rock, all that would happen is that the rock would have fractured. So once your rock is fractured, then there would be a reduction in the resistive in the wave velocities, as well as resistivity values. So you could try out, but no, I have no experience on trying to assess the resistivity. You can probably find out till what depth it is a fractured rock and where the hard rock starts. So that is something which you can try to interpret. People have used seismic refraction also to kind of assess whether a rock needs can be manually or excavated using excavators, or you need to do blasting, because blasting there is usually a there are very strict rules on the use of blast materials. So higher wave velocities would indicate that the rock cannot be excavated, but you would have to use blasting. Same way, you could probably use seismic refraction test after the test to be able to identify whether to what depth the rock is fractured. So that would give you an estimate of up to what zone the strata is probably porous. But exactly porosity values and all, you would not be able to determine.
I hope this answers your question. Ajay Kumarji, you want to ask something? Please, sir. Ajay Kumarji. Okay. So we have a question from Yashpal Shardaji. He wants to ask, how effective are these tests in case of steeply dripping strata?
Steeply dipping strata.
Steeply dripping strata. It's there in the chat box. Steeply dipping strata.
Yeah. You see, there are two things. One is the strata is dipping, and secondly, the ground is sloping. So if the ground is fairly flat and the strata is dipping, both seismic refraction and resistivity test can give you a good hold on that. Particularly resistivity imaging is very good for that. If the ground is also sloping, then you would have to combine it with a survey to match the ground profile and the rock profile. That's a little bit more challenging, but it can be done.
I hope.
But the errors can be introduced if there is erratically dipping rock. That is, if it is not just one dip, but it is folded or wavy kind of, and there are some zones which are maybe there's a shear zone or a anomalous zone, there it could create problems.
I hope this answers the question. Yes, Yashpalji, any follow-up question on this?
We have observed in many places it doesn't give correct results. In steeply dipping rocks, it's
quite possible. But yes, I agree with you that it may not. You will have to cross-check with the borehole data.
Yeah. Always you have to cross-check.
Yes.
And then one more observation. It is a small observation. You have said central crystalline group. It doesn't belong to lesser Himalaya. It belongs to higher Himalaya.
Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Musab Ahmadji. He asks, which one between electrical resistivity and seismic refraction method is economical? How one should select between the two? I repeat, which one between electrical resistivity and seismic refraction method is economical? How one should select between the two?
See, economy as such, resistivity is much cheaper, of course. But depends on your application, what you are is your requirement. And normally we use a combination of both to make sure as it was suggested that sometimes the data is erratic and may not match with the borehole data. So there is nothing like something which we can tell you that this one is a better test and the other is not. You have to sort of go with the combination of the two to be able to get a more reliable and consistent data.
I hope this answers the question. Yes, Nirpendra Kumarji, sir, would you like to ask your question?
It's not a question. Thank you, Ravi. He has got a lot of experience. What again I am also trying to emphasize only, you don't have any straight answer in geotechnical because we are dealing with a very complex geology. Like landslide, there can be n number of variables which will influence, and there can be n number of solutions by different consultants. So even in geophysical testing, there are a number of tests. So the youngsters who want to come in this field, they have to, like, there cannot be a single answer, electrical resistivity or seismic, which one is better. So you have pros and cons. Similarly, one general thing is that geophysical test will cover a large area, and our geotechnical or borehole will cover point areas. So we have to correlate. So just I wanted to add what Ravi is trying to say and what everybody is interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Nripendraji. You put it more effectively.
No, you are right, but just I concluded something like that.
Any other question? Ajay Kumar ji? Sir, you want to ask a question? Okay. Sir, one of the questions that I received from one of the students, he wants to ask whether we have these tests mentioned under Indian standards. Do we have Indian standards for these tests? I feel he's asking about IS codes.
See, in IRC, there is a IRC 123 on geophysical tests. As far as IS code is concerned, IS 1892 gives a general description of the various tests. In fact, 1892 is now being updated, and probably very soon an updated version of IS 1892 will be available, which includes various tests it gives reference to. But IS codes still don't have specific codes individually for each of the tests, like cross-hole and seismic refraction and all that, like ASTM has. Resistivity test, there is a code 3043. Resistivity imaging and all, there is no code for it. But it is mentioned in the IRC 123 special publication, as I told you. So it's coming, and the problem with standardizing these tests is that there is a lot which depends on the expertise of the person interpreting the data. So that's something which we cannot standardize. I cannot tell you that Mr. So-and-so is the expert on this test, so the code cannot specify that he or she should be, doing the test. And so therefore, the expertise, as you know, cannot be standardized. So that is why the codes are facing a problem in, clearly writing down how to interpret the data once you receive it. As far as the data acquisition is concerned, yes, it is a straightforward thing. But it is not like a bearing capacity equation which I can give you that this is how it is going to, behave.
Thank you, sir. Another question we have from Amritanshu Sandliaji. He wants to ask, is there any suitable topography for these tests, or they can be used anywhere?
Interesting. Ideally, always, if it's a flat ground, everything works very well. When you have a rugged topography, sloping ground, then your survey also comes into play, and you have to interpret it very carefully, because depth and elevation, there could be a lot of mismatch if you don't do it. So again, it's as I told you, a little tricky scenario it becomes, and you have to interpret it very carefully. So again, that expertise of the person interpreting the data comes into play.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, you have a question? Sugandha, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'm sorry for another question. So I was wondering about how you determine what type of test you want to do at a particular site based on the initial borehole data. So if you have a certain type of idea of the substrata, what are the factors that you use to determine which type of test you want to you should do in order to get a better estimate of the soil properties?
Unfortunately, there is no straight answer to your question.
No, yes, I assume that would be.
Very often it is a hit and a try. If I get good data which I can interpret, maybe I can make a presentation like this where I don't have the data, I don't present to you.
Yes, I assume. But then the follow-up question for that would be, what are some uncertainty factors that you would suggest in modeling in the further analysis of the?
You see, actually, it depends on the complexity of the problem. When we were facing this problem of this landslide, literally we didn't know what to do. And most of that area, because it was all very disturbed, was not so easily approachable also. So only if you can go there, you can try to do some test.
Right.
So what happens is that initially we did a few tests, and then afterwards slowly the area was cleared, and some things became evident, and after that if required, you can consider doing one or two more tests and then finally come to a solution.
Okay. But wouldn't that be really costly?
There is no very often in some scenarios just doing a set of tests once may not be the end of the investigation. You do a few tests, you get some interpretation, you start working, and then once you do that, then you realize there is something else to be done. So you may consider doing that. Again, there is always an issue of budget.
Yeah, exactly. There is a big issue of the budget if we do hit and trial with the soil testing.
Yes. But when this ground conditions are challenging, nowadays even like tunnel boring and all the activities, you have the instrumentation in place, and as from the instrumentation you get the data, you can interpret, do your analysis again, and change your design accordingly. So this is how it has to go.
Okay. Is there? I'm sorry for keeping while asking. But is there any test? I think you covered the shear wave velocity test, and for attenuation or damping, I know there is the resistant column test, which is the laboratory test.
Resonance column test.
Yeah, which is the laboratory test. But are there any work on?
Block vibration test is done in the field to get the wave velocities and resonance in the field, but that test has a lot of limitations. It would be at one particular depth.
Right. But is there anything for damping on site, like damping test, to figure out damping on the site?
The block vibration test can give you an assessment of damping. You can plot the amplitude versus frequency, and then from the resonance, you go beyond the resonance and the velocities come down, and then you can, from that you can calculate the difference at the same amplitude the two frequencies you have. So on that basis, you can work out the damping ratio.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sugandhaji. Great interacting with you.
Any other questions? I think there are no more questions, sir. So I want to close the session. Again, a very, very, heartily thanks to you all for making this possible, so that the participants, the students, the practitioners, they're going such a huge exposure to your vast experience in the field of geotechnical engineering. And we look forward for such great lectures in the future also. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also on behalf of Senjas, I thank you for giving us this opportunity to do this. And so we have one more presentation left
Yes,
on SPT energy corrections. We look
On
forward
16th
to
of
that.
October. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
we
Yes.
look forward to that.
Definitely, sir. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay, sir. Thank you, Saurabh, sir.
So you can